My name is Harper Quinn. I have the kind of face that makes people underestimate me. Soft features, clean lines, no visible edge. That's useful when you're planning the kind of revenge that needs a smile, not a weapon. You want them relaxed? You want them to believe you've let go. I hadn't. They took my childhood home while I was at my mother's funeral. I mean that literally the sale closed the day I buried the only person who had ever defended me in that family. I came back from scattering her ashes and found out I no longer owned the house I grew up in. I didn't even get a phone call. Just a legal notification slid into my inbox like it was some Black Friday promo. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I have to say here. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The house sat on a quiet hill in Vermont, white siding wraparound porch. One crooked weather vane shaped like a bat. My mother called it the watchtower, even though it never really watched anything but falling leaves and bad cable. But to me, that place was everything. I had drawn my first ghost stories in the attic, built booby traps in the basement, buried every secret I had in the backyard under the pear tree that never bore fruit. After she died, I planned to renovate it not for resale, but for memory. I wanted to live there again. I wanted it to become something new that still whispered the past. What I did not want was for my two half-uncles who hadn't spoken to my mom in years to swoop in with some dusty clause from my grandfather's will and sell it. They got cash. I got a PDF telling me I had 72 hours to collect anything sentimentally relevant. I drove up at midnight. Don't worry, I wasn't planning anything illegal. Not then. I just wanted to walk the halls. Once. Breathe it in. The porch still creaked in the same exact places. The wind chimes I made from soda tabs in 4th grade still jingled like cheap bells. And inside, dust, ghosts, and a silence that felt like it was daring me to scream. I walked through the kitchen, trailed my fingers across the counter where my mom used to roll out cookie dough and snap her fingers when I stole chocolate chips. I sat on the steps for 20 minutes just listening. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried at the funeral either. But something did change. In the attic, I found the box. It was an old Tupperware container covered in stickers, faded and peeling. Inside were dozens of crumpled blueprints I had drawn as a kid. Haunted houses, trapdoor systems, laser mazes made of string. A whole folder was labeled, "The House That Screams Back." I flipped through it, and that's when I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like a designer. I used to work for a theme park company in Florida. I designed 2 horror mazes that went viral on YouTube and a pirate-themed log ride that got shut down for being too intense for 8-year-olds. I wasn't famous, but I knew how to build an experience. And I realized standing there in that attic with my childhood sketches and a growing sense of rage that I didn't need to take the house back. I just needed to make sure no one else would ever want to live in it. 3 weeks later, I made an offer through a dummy LLC. The house had been sold to a flipper, someone who barely touched the interior, but had already posted fake after photos online. When my LLC offered cash, no inspection, and a 21-day close, they accepted. The moment I signed the deed, I had a locksmith change the locks, and I posted a no trespassing sign that looked like it had been written in blood. Not real blood, obviously, yet. I started drawing again, only this time I had a real budget, tools, and zero emotional restraint. I wasn't just going to turn this house into a haunted attraction. I was going to weaponize nostalgia. Every room would be a twisted memory. Every hallway would whisper what they took from me. I called it the Quinn Curse. Just a test name. But it stuck. I started small, invited a few friends from the horror community for a private walkthrough. One of them screamed in the hallway that used to be my nursery. Another tripped over a trapdoor I installed in the coat closet. Nobody made it to the basement, and they all begged me to open it to the public. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the old kitchen with my laptop and mapped out phase 2. Because I didn't just want people to scream, I wanted them to ask who did this. And I wanted the ones who took it from me to come see what they'd created, or rather unleashed. The betrayal wasn't clean. I wish I could tell you my uncles swooped in like cartoon villains, stole the deed with a wicked laugh, and vanished into their next scheme. But no, they were subtle, almost elegant. The kind of betrayal that doesn't come with fireworks, just quietly drawn paperwork and rehearsed condolences. You see, my grandfather's will had a clause. Buried deep under lawyer jargon and yellowed estate notes, it stated, "In the event of the daughter's passing, the property may be considered eligible for liquidation among remaining heirs contingent on no outstanding claim by direct descendants." Guess who technically wasn't listed as a direct heir? Me. I was adopted at 11. My mother, bless her sentimental heart, assumed love trumped law. She never amended the will, never added my name, because she thought the family would understand. They did. They understood exactly how to cut me out. My Uncle Wallace emailed me a week after the funeral. No call, no apology. Just a link to the real estate listing and a line that read, "Figured you'd want a heads up before this goes public. Hope you're holding up okay." I stared at it for 2 hours. Then I clicked the link. There it was, my house, reduced to a 2-sentence description and a slideshow full of lies. They used staged furniture, filtered the lighting, even photoshopped out the stain in the upstairs hall from when the roof had leaked in '04. But the part that made me snap, they called the place a charming fixer-upper with room to grow. Room to grow. That house already grew me. It held every part of who I had been. Awkward, scared, rebellious, creative. I kissed my first crush on the back porch. I carved my initials in the underside of the kitchen table. I wrote horror short stories in the bathroom because it was the only room with a lock and good lighting. And now they were flipping it for profit like it was some crooked Monopoly square. I started doing recon. Not on the house, I already knew every creaky board and haunted shadow. I started watching them. Wallace and Dave, my uncles, half-brothers to my mom, men who lived in another state, but somehow managed to drop in just long enough to handle the paperwork and relieve me of the stress. I dug through their online records. Property deals, lawsuits. Turns out they'd flipped 6 houses in 3 years, always with the same pattern. Find emotionally vulnerable properties, use a legal technicality, make a quick sale. They weren't grieving, they were hunting. So I gave them something to bite. I sent an anonymous inquiry through my dummy company, looking to purchase additional properties nearby for a boutique hotel experience, interested in a joint venture. They bit. Of course they did. Dave called the LLC's number. He thought he was speaking to a fresh young investor named Kara Lynn. Little did he know he was speaking to me, voice disguised and all. They never suspected. Why would they? They thought I was soft, grieving, out of state. That was their biggest mistake. I kept up the act just long enough to get what I needed. Confirmation that they had no personal attachment to the house. No future plans. Just the flip and run. Good. Once the sale went through and the keys were in my hand, I had one rule for myself. No actual damage. Just fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that rots in your chest for weeks. The kind that changes your dreams. The kind I felt when I walked into that house after the funeral and realized nothing was sacred. My first renovation was symbolic. The kitchen wall that once had all our family photos. I kept the nail holes exactly where they were. But instead of photos, I hung shadow boxes. Inside each one, a single antique doll part, a cracked porcelain hand, a blind glass eye, a broken jaw with a red smear, subtle but enough to raise a pulse. In the living room, I ripped up the carpet and painted massive occult-style symbols on the hardwood layered so they faded unless hit by a blacklight. I had speakers installed behind the old fireplace. At random intervals, a child's voice would whisper, "Don't go upstairs yet. He's not ready." Visitors wouldn't know who he was. And that was the point. I planned it all like a story. Every room would deepen the mystery. No jump scares. Just layers of dread that tightened with every creak of the floorboards. It was revenge, sure. But it was also an art piece. I paid for custom lighting rigs to create flickering shadows that had no source. I mounted old family portraits with shifting eyes, literal mechanical movements triggered by motion sensors. I installed scent machines that puffed out the smell of rain mildew and faint candle smoke. Sensory immersion, psychological design. And I made sure to install one peephole in the upstairs guest room that looked out onto a wall, but when you looked through it, you'd see a shadow standing in the hallway behind you. Not real, of course. Just a cleverly placed reflection using a two-way mirror and a timed light source. I know, petty, but tell me that wouldn't make someone reconsider buying the place again. Especially when that someone has already tried to erase your existence from it. I'll be honest with you, breaking into my old house the first time was emotional, but coming back with keys, with ownership, that was delicious. I walked through the front door like a ghost in reverse, something that had died and come back not to haunt, but to rebuild. The air inside still smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old dust, but it no longer choked me with grief. It tasted like opportunity now. But I didn't just want to get even. I wanted everyone else to experience what I felt walking into that home post betrayal. Disoriented, unsure, slightly watched. So I tested it. Before opening it up to the public, I ran a single-night event for a small horror community I knew from my theme park days. 10 people, no cameras, no hints. I told them it was an immersive theater experience based on a made-up New England ghost story. I used a burner account and a fake website slapped together in 2 nights. The price of entry, $20 and a waiver. I watched from a hidden monitor in the attic as they entered. The first guest screamed within 5 minutes. They hadn't even seen anything yet. That was the best part. All I had done at that point was leave a dozen clocks ticking out of sync in the foyer and added a muffled crying sound from a baby monitor hidden under the stairs. That was enough. Halfway through, one guy asked if he could leave early. Said the upstairs hallway gave him unexplainable vertigo. I'd used slightly sloped flooring and low-frequency sound waves under the floorboards. Science, not spirits. Another guest left a Yelp review despite my explicit NDA that simply said, "I saw something in the mirror that wasn't me. I don't care if it was a trick. I'm not going back." Good. I was just getting started. After the test run, I upgraded everything. Got in touch with a friend of mine who specialized in theatrical illusions. We collaborated on the silent room, a bedroom where when you shut the door, all sound disappeared, even your breathing. It drove people mad in under 2 minutes. But my favorite design? The nursery. You remember how in every horror movie there's always a creepy nursery with a rocking chair and a music box? I leaned into it. Hard. The room was filled with vintage toys, each one chosen because it made noise. But the catch was none of them moved when you looked at them. They only activated when your back was turned. I used micromotion sensors and directional sound to make it feel like things were right behind you. Every time someone entered that room, they froze. Every single time. Some even backed out before they crossed the threshold. Perfect. At this point, I had the concept, the build, and a proof of psychological impact. Now came the legal part. I filed paperwork with the city to register the house as a seasonal immersive performance venue. It took a few phone calls and a bottle of wine dropped off at the Planning Commission's office. Look, haunted houses are weird gray areas legally. As long as no one gets injured and the fire exits are clear, you're good. The last hurdle was the name. I tested a few online. The Watchtower Echo House, the Quinn Curse. But none of them stuck like the one that came to me at 3 a.m. Sitting on the porch listening to the wind run through the dead chimes. The hollowing. No fancy subtext. No manor or museum. Just the hollowing. A place where people came to feel something hollowed out of them. I bought the domain, the signage, the logo. Everything, it was real now. A haunted house built out of grief and vengeance. Curated like art. Run like war. I reopened just before Halloween. I didn't use flyers. I didn't take out ads. I sent one anonymous email to a local urban legend subreddit with the subject line, "Has anyone else heard crying from the old White House on Ash Ridge?" That was it. 2 days later, I had over 1,000 upvotes, a dozen reposts, and my burner site's waitlist crashed twice. When people finally came through the doors, they didn't ask, "Is this real?" They asked what happened here. That was the point. And best of all, not a single soul knew the woman behind it. They walked through my childhood home, whispered nervously, screamed and sobbed and clutched each other, and never once realized the girl who used to sleep in the second-floor bedroom now watched them through the walls. That was the power. That was the revenge. But it wasn't over yet. Not until they came. I didn't have to invite them. That's the delicious thing about people who think they've won. They always come back just to admire the ruin, just to gloat, just to reassure themselves that the person they stepped on stayed down. Uncle Wallace and Dave showed up on a Sunday afternoon. I recognized their cheap sense of theater before they even stepped out of the car, both wearing sunglasses indoors, leather jackets, a decade too young for them, and that smug air of, "We used to own this." I had seen their names pop up on the reservation list under different aliases: W, Garrison, and David Marsh, as if I wouldn't notice. Amateur. Still, I let them in. I greeted them in costume, long black coat, painted eye smudges, whispery tone. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? They hadn't seen me in person in years, and the last time they did, I was crying on my porch as they sold off my childhood one brick at a time. They walked through the first 3 rooms with awkward chuckles. Wallace kept pointing out floorboards. "Didn't that used to squeak? Guess they fixed that." Dave kept staring at the paintings like he was trying to remember which aunt they used to belong to. Then they reached the hall of portraits. That was my masterpiece. It looked innocent enough, just a hallway lined with old family photos, smiling black and white snapshots, dusty sepia-toned generations. But every 10 minutes the lights would dim, a slow violin would swell, and the portraits would change. The smiles would fade, the eyes would look down, and in one frame, just one, the photograph would flicker to a picture of me as a child, looking straight at the camera. Then it would flicker back. I watched Wallace stop in front of that one. He tilted his head. "Creepy kid," he muttered. "Oh, uncle, if only you knew." The rest of the walkthrough continued in silence. Dave looked increasingly uncomfortable. He whispered something to Wallace halfway through the nursery scene, probably about how it all felt too personal. Yeah, that was the point. But the cherry on top, the basement. I had converted it into the confession room, a completely pitch-black space where guests sat alone and listened to an audio file whispered through hidden speakers. The voice on the recording was mine, unfiltered, calm, and it said, "They thought no one would notice. They thought the paperwork would hide the betrayal. They forgot houses, remember? And this one, it remembers everything." Wallace sat through the whole thing stiff as a corpse. Dave didn't even last 30 seconds. He bolted upstairs, muttering something about needing fresh air. I met them on the porch afterward, still in character. "Did you enjoy your stay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Dave glanced back at the house like it might follow him. Wallace just grunted, then offered a limp nod. "Creative. Little weird. Not really my thing." That was it. They left. No recognition. No confrontation. Perfect. But a week later, I got a call. Blocked number. When I answered, a pause. Then Wallace's voice. "I don't know what game you're playing, Harper, but that house? It's not funny." I smiled, leaning back in my office chair, surrounded by maps of the house and plans for new scares. "Wasn't meant to be," I said. Then I hung up. After that, I made one final addition to the hollowing. In the upstairs hallway, I placed a new portrait. Just a frame, empty glass. Underneath a plaque. "Some guests leave more behind than they realize." People ask me what it means. I just say, "Depends who you are." And then I smile. Because by now the house isn't just a haunted attraction. It's a message, one that whispers every night. "You took what was mine. Now it's yours, but only if you dare to enter." You know what? Nobody tells you. Scaring people professionally is exhausting. It's not just flickering lights and creepy sound effects. It's calibration, precision, timing. You have to understand people, their expectations, their body language, their fear thresholds. Especially when you're doing what I was doing, turning trauma into tourism. So when the Halloween's soft launch pulled in 3 sold-out weekends in a row, I knew it was time to go big. But first I needed a brand, not the glossy, overproduced kind. I wasn't looking for a team of influencers screaming into GoPros. I wanted myth, word of mouth, the kind of brand that slips into the bloodstream of local folklore. So I made a ghost. Her name was Harper Quinn. No relation to me, obviously. She was an 11-year-old girl who died in the house in 1903 and whose lullaby still echoes in the walls. Her story was entirely fabricated, but I seeded it with just enough truth to make it dangerous. An old census record here, a forged death certificate there. People love to be historians when they're afraid. Then came the props. A broken child's bed in the attic. Scrawlings on the walls in Latin translated poorly on purpose. One single locked trunk with her name carved into the lid. And inside, a music box, slightly off-key. Time to open every 33 minutes. No jump scares. No actors leaping out of closets. The fear was the waiting. Soon rumors started. People said they heard Ava humming in the hallway. That the trunk moved on its own. That photos taken in the house showed an extra shadow. I didn't start those stories, but I sure didn't stop them. I hired a small rotating team to manage operations. I told them very little, gave them code names for rooms, and told them never to correct a guest's story. Let the myth do the marketing, I said. And it did. Within 2 months, The Hollowing had a 3-week wait list. Travel vloggers started showing up uninvited filming walkthroughs. I even fed them a few exclusive clues for their videos. You want to make something feel real. Let people discover it themselves. Or at least think they did. I set up a fake journal in the library. Pages torn, ink smeared, written in a hand that looked like it belonged to a frightened child. People flipped through it wide-eyed. I once caught a grown man whispering, "This can't be real," while his friend filmed his reaction. That clip got 800,000 views in 3 days. Free advertising. Of course, none of this would have worked without what I called the fear architecture. See, fear isn't just emotional, it's spatial. You build dread like you build a staircase. Step by step. Each level darker, tighter, more unbalanced. That's what I did with the layout. Foyer, wide echoing, full of ticking clocks. Living room, faint whispers, flickering lights. Kitchen, sudden silence, long shadows, smell of burnt sugar. Staircase, steps creaked even when no one moved. Hallway, portraits, watching, sound of soft breathing. Nursery, don't even get me started again. Basement, no lights. One speaker, one story. By the time people made it to the end, they were raw. Not panicked, but exposed. Like something in the house knew their secrets. That was intentional. I installed microphones to capture the subtle things people muttered when they were nervous, then used those mutterings in next week's soundscape. Imagine hearing your own words whispered back to you through the walls. They thought it was magic. It was just data. I kept it all. Recordings, feedback. Even heart rate metrics from a few brave souls who wore fitness watches. It became a living loop. Every fear fed the next. I even ran one experiment on a couple who said, "Nothing scares us." Real tough types. Tattoos, loud laughs, the whole deal. I noticed they kept avoiding one room, the guest bathroom. So I made that the final room on their next visit. No blood, no screams. Just a recording of their own laughter, looped, distorted, slowing down. And on the mirror, the words, "You said nothing scares you. You lied." They left early. I didn't need them to be scared of me. I needed them to be scared of themselves, what the house pulled out of them. And if that made The Hollowing more than a haunted attraction, good, because it was never just about ghosts. It was about a house they tried to erase, a girl they tried to forget. And what happens when memory becomes design? By now, The Hollowing was no longer just a project. It was a machine. A living organism that breathed fear and exhaled profit. But the house itself, it hadn't changed a bit. At least not on the outside. White siding, wraparound porch, peeling paint in all the right nostalgic places. It still looked like a place where nothing bad could possibly happen. That was part of the trick. Inside, though, I kept iterating. Not big overhauls, just tweaks. New sensory layers. A light that buzzed slightly too long. A closet that slowly opened during tours without any fanfare. I once installed a mechanism that made a picture frame rotate a single degree per hour, barely perceptible, until you came back the next day and realized something was off. People hated that. They couldn't explain it, couldn't name it, and that made them afraid. But as the attraction grew, so did the paperwork. I had to deal with zoning ordinances, permit renewals, emergency lighting regulations, and neighbors who suddenly cared that the weird old house on the hill was drawing a line of parked cars down their street every weekend. One woman filed a complaint about otherworldly noise disturbances. Her actual wording. I printed it out and hung it in the staff bathroom. Still, the city wanted a meeting. So I put on my adult face, pulled my hair back, wore a camel blazer, and used my real name. I walked into that municipal building like I wasn't the person who once booby-trapped her own guest room with ambient heartbeats and child giggles. The boardroom was small and humid. A circle of tired eyes in cheap polos and name tags. Ms. Quinn, the chairwoman said, eyeing her notes. We're reviewing your license to operate as a seasonal immersive venue. Some community concerns have been raised about volume traffic and potential emotional distress. I gave her the smile I'd practiced in mirrors. I take public safety seriously. All of our effects are non-contact. Our employees are trained in de-escalation, and we post clear warnings at every entrance. Frankly, our attraction operates safer than half the amusement rides downtown. She blinked. I see. And the rumors about actual hauntings? I laughed. Not too loud. Just enough. If I knew how to make ghosts real, I wouldn't be applying for a seasonal license. I'd be applying for a Nobel Prize. Some of them chuckled. And just like that, the tension broke. The license was renewed for another year pending monthly safety reviews and a limit on noise past 11 p.m. Fine. I could work with that. But walking back to the car, I felt something twist in me. A reminder. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was business, which meant I had to protect it. 1 week later, I installed perimeter sensors. Not for guests, for lawyers. I had a backup generator wired in. I fireproofed the attic. I even hired a part-time security consultant who specialized in escape room liability. Because let's be real, success paints a target on your back. And I'd worked too hard to let this crumble because someone tripped on a rug and sued me. Still, I kept the myth alive. If someone asked about Ava Quinn, we'd lower our voices and say, "We don't talk about her in the nursery." If a guest fainted, we left them there for 15 extra seconds before helping them just long enough to let others panic. If a light blew out, we didn't replace it. We let it stay out for 3 nights. People always filled in the blanks better than we could. I even paid a friend to post on Reddit. I saw a second shadow behind me in the mirror at the hollowing. There was no one else in the room. That post got screenshotted, shared on TikTok, turned into a reaction video, and reshared with creepy background music. And just like that, the hollowing had its own entry on a top 5 haunted places in New England list, right below a prison museum and a forest with too many missing hikers. Except I'd designed every inch of it. There were no ghosts. Just ghosts I built. But I'll tell you something weird. Sometimes very late at night, I'd stay behind after closing. I'd walk the house alone, just me and the echoes. And every so often, I'd swear I heard something. A second set of footsteps behind me. A door creaking when nothing moved. The faint sound of humming from the attic. It wasn't scary. Not really. But it was unexpected. Like the house was responding. Not just to the guests, but to me. Of course I wrote it off. Stress, sleep deprivation, too much ambient noise programming. But in the very back of my mind, there was a question I didn't want to ask. What if a house remembers more than we think? And what if you wake it up? Fear sells, but stories stick. That became my motto as The Hollowing entered its 2nd season. I didn't just want guests. I wanted believers. People who left unsure whether they'd just been entertained or cursed. So I created lore drops. If you've never worked in theme park design or immersive storytelling, let me explain. Lore drops are strategically placed fragments of narrative just enough to spark curiosity and trigger theories, but never so much that it kills the mystery. I scattered them throughout the house like breadcrumbs soaked in blood. In the library, I placed a torn letter under a floorboard. It read, "She watches from the attic. The cold is getting worse. If you find this, tell my mother I never stopped looking for the key." There was no key. In the coat closet behind the paneling, I carved the numbers 1103A. Guests tried to decode it for weeks. Some thought it was Ava's birthday. Others thought it marked the date of a death. One guy brought a black light and discovered that the letter A glowed differently. It didn't. That was just cheap ink reacting to moisture. Did I correct him? Absolutely not. I started keeping a whiteboard in the office labeled Guest Lore Theories. Just for fun. Some were wild. One woman swore there were two Ava's twins. One good, one evil. A college student emailed me a 6-page essay arguing that the house was built on a fault line of emotional trauma. He wasn't wrong. The myth grew beyond me. And then came the reporters. A podcast crew reached out, one of those Real Hauntings of America types. I told them no. They showed up anyway, cameras and mics and matching hoodies. I let them walk the house. Said nothing. Their episode, titled The House That Remembers You, went viral in under a week. And once that happened, bookings doubled. Again. I started receiving emails from people asking to rent the house for private seances. I turned them down at first, but eventually I said yes to one group under strict NDA. They paid in cash, brought their own candles, and sat in a circle on the nursery floor for 3 hours. They left in silence. Later, I found one of them had written in the dust on the attic window. She said, "Your name." Clever. Maybe even true. I hadn't gone up during their session. Could have been anything. Could have been nothing. But it didn't matter. Because now they were contributing to the house. That's when I realized something I hadn't planned for. The hollowing was no longer just my revenge. It was becoming a vessel, not for real ghosts, but for everyone's ghosts. People started emailing me with stories. A woman who said her sister vanished in a house just like mine. A man who confessed he felt watched for weeks after visiting. A couple who claimed their toddler started singing Ava's lullaby out of nowhere. They wanted to know, had anyone else reported this? Was it a marketing gimmick? I gave them my best cryptic shrug. The house affects people in different ways. That line, pure gold, repeated in interviews, printed on brochures, painted above the exit door in jagged red letters. The house affects people in different ways. At this point, I could have franchised. Easily. Investors were circling. A theme park chain offered to license the concept and create a hollowing replica in Texas. But no, you can't replicate this. It's not just about design or sound or atmosphere. It's about memory. This house is personal. It's a living document of what they took from me and what I took back. And I wasn't done taking. Around that time, something strange happened. I got a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was shaky, like from someone older. Inside, just one sentence. She was real, you know. No signature. Just that. I checked the security cams. Nothing. No one had dropped it off. No USPS mark. Just appeared. Now I'm a rational person. I build illusions for a living. I know how easy it is to fake mystery. But still, sometimes I'd lie awake upstairs listening to the creaks of the floorboards below me and wonder if I had gone too far. If the house had absorbed too much fear, too much grief, too many whispers from too many people. What if I hadn't just rebuilt the house? What if I'd activated it? There's a term in architecture called resonance. It refers to how a structure responds to frequencies, vibrations that match the natural rhythm of the materials. Hit the right note and a wall can sing. Hit it wrong and it can shatter. I started to wonder if the hollowing had found its own resonance. Because things began to happen. Small things at first. Things I could dismiss. One morning, I walked into the house and found every door slightly ajar. Not wide open, just off by 2 inches. No alarms triggered. No signs of break-in. My staff swore they locked everything the night before. Another time, I found all the clocks had stopped at exactly 3. Zotria. I checked the power supply. No outages. Just silence. Then came the real moment. The one that made me stop laughing it off. It was during a private tour. A VIP couple had paid 4 figures for an after-hours experience. Full house lights dimmed one guide only. That guide was me. I wanted to feel the energy again up close. Everything was going smoothly until we hit the attic. They were giggling nervously, whispering to each other like teenagers, even though they were probably in their 40s. And then the woman said, "Hey, who's the girl in the corner?" I turned. There was no one there. I smiled, playing it cool. "That's the Ava effect," I said. The attic gets to everyone. But she wasn't laughing. Neither was her husband. She waved at us, he said, "Right before you turned around. Now I've faked figures in corners. Mirrors, shadows, optical illusions. But not that night. Nothing was supposed to be active in the attic. They left early. Still polite. Still thrilled. But I didn't go back into that attic for a week. When I finally did, I found something new. A single child's shoe size 4 tucked behind a beam. Covered in dust. Canvas worn thin. It wasn't part of any scene. I don't even remember owning a prop like that. I boxed it. Labeled it. Found 1103. Attic. Then I locked the box. But I didn't throw it away. Because part of me was curious. Not scared. Not yet. Just paying attention. I started asking the staff quietly. Anything weird lately? Answers varied. The lights in the nursery flicker more than they used to. Someone keeps leaving the basement speaker volume turned up even after I set it to 0. Guests keep reporting the smell of flowers in the library. We don't use scent effects there. I could have blamed Miss Fire's draft's paranoia, but there were too many instances. Too many details I hadn't designed. And then there was the mirror. The second-floor hallway mirror. Oval gilt frame sourced from a thrift store 2 towns over. I'd installed it purely for atmosphere. One night I caught my reflection blinking when I wasn't. Once. Just once. But that was enough. I didn't sleep upstairs that night. I crashed in the office. On the couch. I told myself it was because I'd had wine, or I didn't want to deal with creaky floorboards. But I knew the truth. Something was shifting. And then came the message. Not on a note. Not in a dream. Not even scribbled on a wall like some bad horror movie twist. It was whispered. Through the intercom system. At exactly 3:03 m. The same time all the clocks had stopped 2 weeks before. I was in the kitchen reviewing footage when the speakers crackled. Just once. And then, she's still here. That was it. No static. No glitch. Just a calm young girl's voice. Neutral. Factual. I yanked the power cords out of the wall. Every last one. The house went dark. And I just stood there listening. No follow-up. No flicker. Just the sound of my own breath in the dark and the faint creak of a floorboard upstairs. I didn't tell the staff. Didn't want to start a panic. Didn't want the brand to unravel. But I started carrying a recorder with me at all times. Not for the guests. For me. Because I had built the hollowing from memory and vengeance and artifice. But now it felt like it was building something back. And I wasn't sure I was still in control. People often ask me, have you ever actually seen a ghost? And I always laugh. It's part of the act. Keeps the illusion going. But the real answer depends what you mean by seen. Because the hollowing didn't need to show you a full-bodied apparition in a Victorian gown to get under your skin. It didn't need chains or moaning or cold spots, though we had those too. The real haunt, it was subtler, closer, slower. It wasn't something you saw. It was something that saw you first. It started with the basement, again. I used to feel pride every time I walked down those narrow stairs and watched the flickering light reveal the edge of my work, the dripping pipes, the chalk markings on the walls, the exposed brick where we projected invisible messages that only appeared through fog. But after that voice came through the intercom, the basement started to feel off. Not the designed kind of off. Not the, is that mold or fake blood? Kind. I mean wrong. There was a draft that wasn't in the blueprints. A smell like old dirt and wilted roses. And one night the speaker clicked on by itself. No voice this time. Just breathing. Shallow. Unsteady. Like a kid hiding in a closet after being caught stealing. I yanked the batteries again. Checked the wires. Rebooted the system. Then I stood in the dark and whispered, "If this is you, Ava, what do you want?" The speaker popped. No answer. Just one soft thump on the floorboards above me. The nursery. That was the one room I'd always controlled with surgical precision. Toys placed by hand. Lights dimmed to 43% brightness. Air circulated just enough to rustle the hanging mobile. It was meant to feel real but not be real. But when I entered the nursery that night, the rocking chair was already moving. Not wildly. Not violently. Just gently. Back and forth. Like someone had just stood up. I stood there for a full minute, heart pounding, and told myself, draft, loose floorboard, HVAC vibrations. Then I saw the handprint, small, dusty, on the inside of the window pane. I didn't touch it. I didn't breathe near it. I just backed out of the room, locked the door, and slept in my car. The next morning, the handprint was gone. But that was the thing, so was the chair. Just gone. I called my staff. None of them moved it. None of them had keys to that room after hours. We searched the entire house. No chair. Until 3 days later, it showed up in the attic. Upside down. Balanced on its back legs like someone had been spinning it and just let go. Now here's the part where most people would burn the house down. Call a priest. Take a sabbatical. I did none of that. I took photos, documented everything. Then I added a new plaque outside the nursery door. This room resets itself. We don't ask why. Guests loved it. They thought it was genius storytelling. I let them think that. Meanwhile, my cameras, 3 of them newly installed, started capturing static right before the chair moved. Always around 3. Sto 3 me, every single time. That number again. So I started researching. I dug into old records of the house, land deeds, archives, census logs, even old church records from the 1900s. Nothing directly mentioned an Ava Quinn, of course. That was fiction. But I did find something else. A girl named Annabelle Quince lived in the house in 1903, age 11, disappeared. No follow-up, no investigation. Just one line in a school ledger. Annabelle Q. Withdrew October. Withdrawn. That same month I'd picked as Ava's invented death. Coincidence? Maybe, but I couldn't unsee it. The hollowing was built on lies. Carefully crafted marketable lies. But now someone was answering them, filling in the blanks with pieces of its own. I had been curating a ghost story, and the house, it seemed, had decided to finish the ending. Guests kept reporting new things I hadn't designed. A little girl's reflection in the glass of the coat closet, laughter coming from vents we'd never installed speakers in, cold fingers brushing against their backs on the stairs. One woman fainted after whispering into the basement grate and hearing her own voice answer back. We checked the recordings. There was no playback, but her response wasn't identical. It said something slightly different. Just 2 words, not yours. I added it to the guest board of theories. They loved it. They thought I did it. And maybe part of me wanted to believe that I was just that good at fear. But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. Because every creator reaches a point where the thing they built stops taking direction and starts giving it. You never really expect your own creation to turn on you. I mean, you plan every angle, every wire, every whisper in the dark. You know where the illusions begin and end. You design them. But when the hollowing started feeding itself, shaping fear without your input, it wasn't thrilling anymore. It was invasive and personal. Take the garden, for example. Originally, it was just background, a set dressing. The old pear tree my mom loved still stood in the back, twisted and bare like it had always been. Guests weren't even allowed back there. Too much liability, uneven dirt, no lighting. But then someone climbed the fence. A guest. We don't know how long she was out there, 15 minutes tops. But when she came back in, she looked pale, disoriented. She told the guide, "She's not in the house anymore." When they asked who, she just whispered, "The girl." We checked the cameras. They cut out. For exactly 12 minutes. No audio, no video, just black static with a faint hiss like a tape rewinding. That's when I knew I needed help. Not an exorcist, a historian. I reached out to a woman named Dr. Margot Fenwick, runs a folklore department at a local college. She's one of those people who looks like she's solved murders no one talks about. Sharp eyes, strong tea breath, quiet voice that makes everyone lean in. I invited her for a walkthrough. No jump scares. No show. Just a silent tour. When we got to the attic, she stopped dead. "Did you choose this location because of the land?" she asked. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She reached into her giant leather satchel and pulled out a folded map, an old, brittle surveyor's chart from the 1880s. She pointed to a red-inked circle. "This house sits on the edge of what used to be a cemetery. Mostly unmarked graves. Children's fever deaths. There was a quarantine here once. They never moved the bodies." My stomach dropped. I laughed it off, but not convincingly. "So you think it's haunted?" She stared at the ceiling. "I think you called something And I think it answered, "The question is, are you still the one asking?" That night, I sat in the attic alone. I lit a candle, not for drama, just to see shadows move honestly. And I asked again, "What do you want?" Nothing. Then the candle flickered sideways like breath. And I heard it. 3 soft knocks on the attic wall. The one that used to back into the guest bedroom. The one we'd never opened because there was no door, no handle. Just drywall. I stood, walked to it, put my hand on the cold surface, and from the other side another knock. Not echo, not pipework, not wind. Knock. Pause. Knock, knock. Morse code. I ran downstairs and dug out my old Boy Scout manual, the same one I used to fake ghost symbols during my design phase. 3 knocks. 1 pause. 2 knocks. E-R. U-R. That was it. That's all it said. I slept in my car again. In the morning, I had the drywall removed. There was a cavity, small, narrow, a leftover piece of house design from when they remodeled in the 1950s. And in it, a rusted tin box. Inside, a photo, faded, sepia, torn at the edges. A little girl sitting on a porch that looked exactly like mine, holding what looked like a music box. Her eyes were blurred, like she'd moved just as the shutter clicked. On the back, scrawled in pencil, "Not Ava. Don't name her. That's how she stays." I didn't sleep for days after that, because I remembered something I'd said in an early interview when the hollowing had first gained traction. I'd been joking offhand, bragging a little. "She's called Ava. We made her up. But honestly, it feels like she's always been here. I named her. I gave her a body, a song, a nursery. I didn't create a ghost. I gave one a home." From that moment on, the hollowing didn't feel like mine anymore. Not completely. People started noticing. "Staff quit," said the air felt heavier. Guests reported time jumps checking phones after a tour and realizing 2 hours had passed when the whole thing was supposed to last 45 minutes. And always around 3. 03. The intercom would breathe again. Never a word. Just breath. The house didn't hate me, but it didn't need me anymore either. I had started something I couldn't undo, and maybe that was always the point. I stopped trying to fix things after that. There's a point where you realize you're not the architect anymore. You're just another part of the blueprints. And in the hollowing, my role had changed. I used to be the designer, the storyteller. Now, I was the caretaker. The house didn't attack me. It didn't threaten or torment. But it managed me, nudged me, like I was one of its carefully placed props. Take the recordings. I used to curate every sound you heard inside, from the muffled crying to the whispered lines I'd written myself. But one night I was doing routine maintenance in the control room, reviewing audio loops, when I found something that didn't belong. Track labeled 033, no file notes, no tags. I didn't remember making it. I hit play. It was me, my voice, from weeks ago, maybe months, saying, "She's not in the house anymore." The line the guest had said after wandering into the garden. But in this version, I said it differently, slower, with something in my tone, like resignation, like warning. And behind it, layered low, like ambient feedback laughter, a child's laugh, distant, delighted. But the worst part, I wasn't alone in the track. There was a second voice, barely audible. I boosted the levels, ran it through a few filters. The second voice whispered, "You brought them here?" Not accusatory, just factual. That hit me hard, because I'd invited thousands of people to walk through that house to brush up against something I didn't fully understand. I marketed it as fiction, as immersive fear. But it was never fiction, not anymore. The hollowing had become an ecosystem, a feeding ground for collective dread. People brought their trauma with them. They left it behind like gum under a desk. And the house, it kept it, it recycled it. You could feel it in the walls now. The way the house seemed to breathe a little deeper after each tour, like it was growing fuller, heavier. One night, I watched a guest sob quietly in the nursery. No trigger, no actor, just emotion. He collapsed to his knees and whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over. When we asked later what had happened, He said he'd smelled his mother's perfume. She'd died 3 years prior. We don't use scent cues in that room. After that, I stopped adding new scares. The house didn't need them. It had learned how to respond. It began personalizing experiences for guests without my input. A woman emailed to ask if the closet door slamming shut in her childhood room was a planned effect. I asked which room. She said the guest bedroom. That room doesn't have a closet door. It never has. Another group reported seeing a man in the mirror behind them in the basement. Tall, balding gray shirt, they said. He smiled. Didn't blink. No one on staff matched that description. Our mirrors aren't reflective anymore. They're filtered glass sprayed from behind to distort images. They're designed to warp, not reflect. And then there was the child. Not Ava. Not the girl we invented. This was someone else. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7. Several guests reported seeing him at the edge of the library holding a toy truck. Always silent. Always just before the tour ends. We check the footage. No boy. But the toy truck, that did appear. Placed in the corner one morning. Rusted red chipped. We keep it in the office now. No one wants to touch it. And still the guests keep coming. In fact, attendance is higher than ever. The more unsettling the stories get, the more people line up. They want to be scared. They want something to believe in. And the hollowing delivers because it has become real in the only way that matters. Emotionally, psychologically, existentially, it taps into the things we don't say out loud. Grief, regret, shame, the question of what comes next. I used to think this place was about what they did to me. But now I understand. It's about what we do to ourselves. We walk into places like this hoping to feel something: terror, catharsis, control. But sometimes the place looks back, and it feels us too. I can't explain what the hollowing has become. Not in full. I only know it started with pain, then built itself into a house-sized metaphor, and then something stepped into it, or woke up inside it. And now we coexist. The designer, the ghost, the guests, the echoes. Every night I walk the halls before closing. I say goodnight to each room. Sometimes the lights flicker in reply. Once I whispered thank you. And from the nursery, I swear I heard, "You're welcome." The media started calling me the architect of fear. Articles ran headlines like, "She turned her childhood trauma into the scariest house in America." The hollowing. Is it haunted or just brilliantly evil? Podcasters obsessed over me. TikTokers begged for behind-the-scenes tours. One even camped out in the parking lot for 48 hours, hoping to catch the ghost girl on film. I kept my interviews minimal, strategic. Say too much and you break the spell. Say too little and they invent better lies than you ever could. I said just enough to keep the story going. But the fame brought pressure. People wanted more. Bigger scares. Bloodier rooms. Screaming actors. Shock value. But that was never the point. The hollowing wasn't a horror maze. It was an emotional mirror. It reflected something back at you, twisted, exaggerated, sometimes unrecognizable, but always yours. So I made a choice. I leaned out of horror and leaned into memory. I opened a new room, the reflection parlor. No props, no sounds, just a single chair, a large mirror, and a flickering overhead bulb. Guests sat in silence for 3 minutes. Some laughed nervously. Others cried. One man vomited. Told us afterward he saw a version of himself in the mirror, but older, broken. He looked like he'd made all the wrong choices, he whispered. He mouthed something. I think it was run. There's no camera in that room. We don't record anything. But the stories keep coming. One guest said the mirror showed her childhood bedroom. Another saw the hallway from a hospital where her mother died. I swear I didn't design that. That's when I realized something vital. The house had learned how to remember. Not just for me, but for everyone. And memory in a haunted place is far more terrifying than any demon you can design. It was around this time that I stopped taking money from investors. They came in with their offers. Haunted escape room franchises, VR tie-ins, brand sponsorships. One group wanted to build a hollowing spin-off in Vegas, complete with animatronic ghosts and AI jump scares. I declined, because I knew the truth. You can't clone grief. You can't duplicate betrayal. You can't franchise revenge. And the hollowing was all of that baked into drywall and floorboards and fog. It didn't want sequels. It was the sequel to every story I buried, to every injustice I never got to scream about. But still something was missing. A conclusion. Not for the house. For me. So I did what I'd avoided for years. I invited them back. Wallace, Dave, my charming uncles, the ones who sold my mother's legacy and tossed me out with the garbage. They didn't recognize the invitation, of course. It came under a fake event brand. New England Legacy Reclaim Tour. Real estate investors, they thought. A high-end Halloween concept pitch. They came wearing suits. Big mistake. I met them in the foyer. No costume this time. No makeup. Just me. Harper. Wallace blinked. You run this place. I nodded. I built it. Dave frowned. Wait, this is your house? I smiled. It always was. I didn't need to gloat. The house would do that for me. I walked them through personally. Showed them the portraits. The nursery. The garden where I'd buried my dog's collar as a child. Their faces changed with every step. Wallace tried to joke it off. All this? Over a house. I paused. No, I said. All this. Because of a house. We ended the tour in the reflection parlor. I left them there. Didn't say a word. They stayed the full 3 minutes. When they came out, neither of them looked at me. Dave's hands were shaking. Wallace wouldn't speak. They left without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail. No note. Just the deed to the land behind the house. Property they'd kept. Just in case. Now it was mine. That night, I stood in the garden and finally said it aloud. I forgive you. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. And for the first time, I swear the wind stopped. The air went still. And from the attic, a single music box note played clear as a bell. The hollowing had reached its final form. Not physically, it still looked the same. Same crooked weather vane. Same wraparound porch that moaned like an old woman every time the wind hit it. Just right. But spiritually, existentially, it was complete. I didn't need to add anything anymore. No new scares. No new rooms. I didn't even write scripts. The house ran itself like a living organism. It had a rhythm now, a cycle of fear and release, grief and curiosity, and I had changed too. I no longer saw myself as a business owner or designer. I was the keeper of a threshold. Every guest that walked through the door wasn't just there to get scared. They were searching for something, a memory, a confrontation, maybe even a goodbye. And the hollowing gave it to them, or showed them why they couldn't have it. It wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a quiet moment in the nursery, someone staring too long at the mobile, whispering the name of someone they lost. Sometimes it was a man pausing in the hallway, hand trembling on the portrait of a stranger who looked too much like his father. Sometimes it was just silence. Those were the most sacred moments, but they were starting to weigh on me. I couldn't stay in the house the way I used to. It didn't scare me. It drained me, like it was using my energy to keep going. I'd wake up exhausted, dreamless. I'd forget conversations. Whole days would disappear from my memory. I began to wonder, was this the price? Not for revenge, for keeping the door open between stories and spirits. One night I stayed late again. I hadn't done that in weeks. I wandered the house in complete silence. No lights, no music, just the hum of old electricity and the occasional groan of beams settling into the earth. In the kitchen, I found a letter. Not mailed, not printed, just there, folded neatly, sitting on the countertop like it had been waiting. No envelope. No handwriting I recognized. Just 5 words. You can rest now, Harper. I stared at it for a long time. Was it from a guest? A staff member? Some TikTok fan playing a prank? Maybe, but the handwriting looked like mine. Not recent. Old. I flipped it over. On the back, a drawing childish and crooked. A floor plan of the house. My old floor plan. The same one I drew when I was 9 years old. With crayons. I remembered the little ghost I'd doodled in the attic. It was there. Except now it had 2 figures beside it. One tall, one small, holding hands. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat down on the cold tile and let the silence wash over me. The house wasn't threatening me. It wasn't taking from me. It was letting me go. I'd built it out of vengeance, out of spite, out of the aching emptiness of being forgotten. But now it had become something else. A place where others could remember. And maybe that was enough. I walked through every room one last time that night, touched each doorknob, stood in the nursery until the mobile stopped spinning, breathed in the scent of the dusty library. Then I locked the front door, went outside, and for the first time in years I looked at the house not as a monument to pain, but as a gift. It didn't belong to me anymore. It never really had. It belonged to them. To the girl who waved from the attic window, to the child who whispered through the grate, to every visitor who left feeling slightly more whole or slightly more broken. I whispered into the wind, "Take care of them." And from somewhere deep inside the house, the faint sound of a lullaby echoed once. Just once. Then silence. I walked away, not with fear, but with peace. I moved 3 towns over, bought a modest cottage near the woods with no upstairs, no basement, no attic, just 1 floor, 4 windows and quiet. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't designing anything. No sound cues, no trapdoors, no hidden speakers or vibrating floor panels. Just real wind, real birds, and the occasional raccoon scratching at the trash can. I planted tomatoes. I read novels. I watched horror movies without analyzing the lighting. And for a while, I didn't talk about the hollowing at all. I let my staff run it. The veterans stayed. A few new ones came in bright-eyed, curious, and wonderfully unaware of how deep the house could go. I told them just enough to keep them safe, not enough to scare them off. It was better that way. The guests still came. People still cried in the reflection parlor. Someone even proposed marriage in the garden under the dead pear tree, because apparently that's their spot. The irony didn't escape me. But something else started to happen too. Letters. Dozens. Then hundreds. Not fan mail. Not press. Confessions. People wrote to tell me what they'd seen, what they'd felt, what the house had taken from them or given back. A woman who finally let go of her sister's death after hearing her name whispered in the attic. A man who faced the image of himself as a child in the mirror and forgave who he used to be. A mother who brought her son and claimed he saw the girl in the window and drew her in exact detail weeks later. They thanked me, not for the scares, but for the space, and that's when I finally understood what I'd built. The hollowing was never really about revenge. That was just the ignition. The house had become something larger, a vessel for grief, for fear, for change. And I had been the first to walk through it, the first guest, the first offering. Not long after I got a voicemail. It was from a reporter, soft-spoken, polite. She'd visited the house recently and wanted to ask me one simple question for her article. Would you ever come back? I didn't answer right away. But that night, I stood by my kitchen window and looked out across my little vegetable garden. And I thought about the last room I'd designed. A room no one knew existed yet. I'd called it the exit. It's not on the blueprints. It doesn't show up on the tour. There's no signage. It's just a door behind a door. It leads to a quiet hallway with nothing on the walls. No props. No sound. At the end of the hall, a full-length mirror. And behind that mirror, a dark room no one ever enters. Except me. Just once. Before I left, I stood in that hallway staring into that mirror. And I said, "This is the last part of me you can have." And the light above flickered. And stayed on. Which meant the house understood. It accepted the trade. It let me go. So no, I won't go back. Not as a guest. Not as a guide. But I'll always be in that house. Because in a way, the story only worked because I walked away. And now, the story belongs to you. There's one last thing I want you to know. The house still calls to me sometimes gently, sometimes like a whisper wrapped in the wind. I'll be chopping vegetables or half asleep in the bath, and suddenly I'll feel that familiar pull in my chest. The one that says, something's changed. Come see. But I don't. Not because I'm afraid. Because I finally understand my role was never to stay, it was to start. I built the hollowing from a place of anger and loss. I designed it with all the tools of illusion and vengeance I knew. I wanted it to scream back at the world for what it had taken from me. And for a while it did. But now the house breathes with the weight of everyone's stories. It evolved. It became real in the way trauma is real quiet, heavy, deeply personal, yet universally understood. It is grief with walls, memory with hinges, love in mourning clothes. And it works, because it doesn't try to fix anyone. It just lets you feel without shame, without pressure, without answers. That's rare. You'd be amazed what people see inside those walls. Some confront their ghosts. Some make peace with them. Some leave theirs behind. The hollowing doesn't force anything. It simply holds space. And in doing that, it does what no therapist, priest, or medium ever could. It lets the silence speak. And maybe that's why it was built at all. Not for me. Not for Ava or whatever name she once wore. Not even for the guests. But for the echo that lives in all of us. The part of you that was hurt quietly. That was buried and forgotten. That learned to haunt itself just to feel seen. So now before I go, trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. Because if the hollowing ever finds its way to you through a story, a dream, a memory you forgot you'd buried, go, let it show you who you were, and who you're still becoming. But only if you're ready to leave something behind. Now, get in the mood to listen to this story again sometime, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. And if you made it this far, thank you. From both of us, me, and the house. Breathe out. Let the echo of the story settle like dust in an old hallway. You've walked through pain, revenge, memory, and something else entirely. You've felt doors open and close. You've stood in attics that remember your name. You've listened for footsteps you hoped and feared you'd never hear. But now you're safe. The house doesn't follow. It waits. It always waits. So soften your thoughts now. Let your mind unhook from the creaking floorboards and fogged mirrors. Let your breath lengthen. Let your shoulders fall. No ghosts tonight. Just dreams. Just the hum of a quiet room, a still garden, and a pear tree that never gave fruit, but still stood tall. You are no longer inside the hollowing, but maybe it's still inside you. And that's okay, because even haunted places need someone to remember them gently. Good night, traveler. Sleep deep. Sleep unafraid. End of script. Good night.